Welcome to Resume the Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Page, and I'm here to spread the message that you can, in fact, be happy in your career. I'm a former executive recruiter turned career coach, and I am obsessed with learning about why people have chosen their career, what led them to that decision, and how they achieved happiness in the process. So, come join the ongoing conversation that exposes you to career paths of all origins with one thing in common: happiness. So, press play and let's resume the conversation with this week's episode. Welcome to today's episode of Resume the Podcast. Today, we are diving into something I absolutely love to talk about. We are talking about personalities and professional paths. So today, we're going to explore one of the most talked about tools in the world of personal development and career planning, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, also known as the MBTI, or just simply Myers-Briggs. So this is a personality assessment, and it has sparked countless conversations about how we understand ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we navigate our careers. So for those who are unfamiliar with the MBTI, it categorizes personalities into 16 distinct types based on 4 dichotomies. So the first dichotomy is introversion versus extroversion. The second is sensing versus intuition. The third is thinking versus feeling. And the fourth is judging versus perceiving. So each type offers a unique perspective on how individuals perceive the world, how we make decisions, and all of that, as you can imagine, has a very profound effect and has profound implications for career choices and career satisfaction. Throughout the episode, we will unpack how the MBTI can serve as a compass for aligning your career with your core personality traits. We're going to look at some of the most common and the least common types, and then some other fun stats related to the MBTI. It should be said that, let's say you are an INFP, right? Just because you have an N in there, which means intuitive, right? It doesn't mean that you are not sensing, and vice versa. If you're an ISFP, that doesn't mean that you have zero intuition, right? It's a scale, and really more a spectrum, I should say. So whether you are a staunch believer in the MBTI, a skeptic, or you're just curious about what your personality type might say about your ideal career path, today's episode is definitely going to provide you some valuable insights and thought-provoking discussions. So today we're just going to kind of do like a surface dive into what the most common types are and what the more rare types are and some other fun things. We're not going to go through all of them. If you listen to this episode and you're like, no, I want you to go through all of them, email me, reach out, DM me on Instagram. It's @resume.careers and let me know. And I will be happy to do a whole episode on every single MBTI type. But for now, we're just going to kind of introduce you to what it is and how it can be used. So grab your coffee, settle in. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road and listen with the ears, and let's go. Okay, let's start with just breaking down what the Myers-Briggs is. So it is a self-report inventory designed to identify a person's personality type, their strengths, and their preferences. This questionnaire was developed by Isabel Myers and her mother, Catherine Briggs, based on their work with Carl Jung's theory of personality types. Today, the MBTI inventory is one of the world's most widely used psychological instruments. This is used in corporations all across the globe. It really, really indicates what your core personality characteristics are, which is so valuable when you're building teams, when you're hiring people, and when you're just working with someone who you have to be able to work with. It's really, really helpful to know what their type is and how it relates to yours and how your type relates to theirs, right? So just to reiterate what I said earlier, there are 16 types and it is a spectrum. So even though, let's say you get labeled as an E or an extrovert, on the scale, on that little spectrum, you might be really close to the middle, which would make you kind of a more a more introverted extrovert and vice versa. So if you are labeled as an I or an introvert, but you're very close to the center of that spectrum, you might be a more extroverted introvert. And if you're all the way over to one side or the other, then you're more of an extreme, a more stereotypical, if you will, representation of what that I or E is. It should also be noted that, again, everybody is a little bit of everything, and we spend time in each category, but we tend to spend more time in one than the other. Let's just break down the categories. Extrovert versus introvert. I had somebody explain this, or I think I read it somewhere, and I was like, oh my God, that is such a great way to explain extroversion over introversion. Because we tend to think about introverts as just really quiet people who don't like people, right? And a lot of extroverts also, aren't really or wouldn't describe themselves as people. But when you see them out and about, you're like, oh, that person is clearly an extrovert. They're really good with people. So this is how I was explained the difference between extrovert and introvert. So imagine you have a bank, a piggy bank, right? And if you're an extrovert, spending time with people, you get more and more and more coins in that bank. So you're filling that bank up. And the more people you spend time with, the more energy you get. So they're like little energy coins that you're just putting in that piggy bank. Extroverts, it's the opposite. Every time you spend time with people, you have to pull out coins and basically pay that energy out. So the more people you spend time with and the more energy you're giving out, the less you have in that bank. And the more time you spend by yourself, the more coins end up in that bank. So you can think of it again as a little energy bank. And extroverts gain energy by being around other people. They feed off of that energy and they can deposit more money into that little bank. And extroverts, it's the opposite. They actually gain a lot of energy just from themselves. They are their own little energy money tree. And when they go out around people, they have to kind of pay that out, right? So they're reaching into that bank and paying it out. So that is the difference between extroversion and introversion. If you get really energized around people, you're an extrovert. If you find that you are just drained of energy when you come home after being in a really social setting, you're probably an introvert. And that doesn't mean that you don't like going out and socializing. It just means that you need to recover, right? Extroverts don't really feel that. They don't need the same recovery time as an introvert might. Cool. Moving on. Sensing versus intuition. And again, if you're an S type, that doesn't mean that you're lost with intuition, that you have no intuition and there's no hope for you. You do. Everybody has intuition. But sensing versus intuition in regards to the MBTI is really just hands-on experience versus abstract theory. So sensing types really like learning through experience. They like the tangible feel. They like being able to see the real thing and learn by doing, versus intuitive types who really enjoy grasping on to abstract theories, abstract concepts, and recognizing patterns in a discussion or in whatever, they're looking into, whether it's at work, something going on at work, or if they're in school and they're, writing a paper on something. They're really good at noticing patterns and understanding those sort of more abstract theories that are impossible to lay your hands on. So sensing types have a great use of that realistic understanding, right? They really understand reality, whereas intuitive types really understand those abstract thoughts and abstract concepts. So thinking versus feeling, again, if you're a feeling type, that doesn't mean that you don't think. Obviously, you think. And if you're a thinking type, you obviously still feel because you're human. You have both of those things. We just kind of tend to make decisions based on one or the other. Thinking versus feeling is just facts versus emotions when making a decision. So if you tend to go by your gut and make decisions based on that gut, probably a feeling type. If you really need facts and you feel so uncomfortable making decisions based on emotions as opposed to cold hard facts, you're probably a thinking type. If the thought of not having any cold, hard facts that you can look at and say, I know that this decision is going to work because of all of this information and all of this research. It has to work because of all of this. There is proof, right? That is a thinking type. Moving on. Judging versus perceiving. This is the one where I find people have more confusion. Judging is really just structure and routine, while perceiving is flexibility and adaptability. So if you're somebody who really values structure, who feels really lost without a routine, you might be a judging type. And if you're somebody who routine sounds like death to you, that's probably, you're probably a perceiving type. Cool. So those are the categories. Moving on to some really fun stats. The most common type, believe it or not, is ISFJ. So introverted, sensing, feeling, and judging. This is also, I should say, the most common type for women. ISFJs are known to be very warm, very kind-hearted. They're super hardworking, very, very dependable. And they are kind of what you would think of as a stereotypical introvert, right? They tend to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more serious, very conscientious, all around kind of great people. So I'm happy that they are the most common type. So some careers that you might find this type in, the ISFJ, you might find them as an accountant, as an administrator, a banker, a bookkeeper, a child care provider, a counselor, a nurse, office manager, paralegal, social worker, or a teacher. So the most common type for men is ISTJ. So women, it was ISFJ. For men, it's ISTJ. So the only difference there is the T and the F, which is kind of interesting and also not super surprising. So men tend to be a little bit more concerned with the rules. They end up being a little bit less led by their emotions, which is cool. They tend to be, this type tends to be very calm. Like I said, very concerned with rules, decisive, honest, very independent, and straightforward. The flip side, this can make them a little bit insensitive and a little bit stubborn. Not bad, just something to be aware of. If you are an ISTJ, just understand that sometimes, especially if you're working with somebody who is an F, to maybe, soften those edges a little bit. So some careers that you might find an ISTJ in include accountants, computer programmers, dentists are typically in this personality type, doctors, a librarian, lawyers, police officer, and a military leader. The rarest type is INFJ. This is the rarest type for men. It is also the overall rarest type. The reason that this is the rarest type is because it's kind of a contradiction. You're kind of a walking contradiction if you're an INFJ. The reason is INFJs are super easygoing and they're also super perfectionists. They're logical and they're emotional. They're creative and they're super analytical. So they kind of live in both worlds, which is really interesting and makes them the rarest type. Careers for the INFJ could include artists, actors, entrepreneurs, religious workers, musicians, librarians, a counselor or a psychologist, a teacher, or a photographer. And I think one to note is the artist, actor, writer, because those types, those careers do really involve both sides of the coin. Like you have to be logical and analytical in order to make a business around art work. But artists obviously tend to be very creative and in touch with their emotions. And to be successful at that, you have to have that perfectionism and that analytical thinking in order to create a business around it, right? So it's no surprise that artists and actors tend to be this type. The rarest type for women is the INTJ. So again, the only difference there is the F and the T. These guys are also known as creative perfectionists. So a little bit different, but they tend to be a little bit more analytical, a little bit more logical, but also very creative. And if you listen to the career list, you'll kind of see that they tend to be a little bit more in that analytical field. So scientists, mathematicians, engineers, dentists, doctors, lawyers, judges, teachers, right? So through that list, you can hear that these are a little bit more analytical professions as opposed to the INFJ, which had actors and entrepreneurs and sort of more theoretical professions, right? So kind of interesting. Also, moving on, I wanted to talk about the highest and lowest earners because I think it's so interesting that this is kind of like baked into our personality. I will say that I don't think it's like a death sentence, or a financial death sentence if you're not one of the higher earners. But the highest earner is an ENTJ. And here are two very famous, very rich people who are apparently ENTJs. One is Jeff Bezos, pretty wealthy, pretty successful. The other is Bill Gates, same. So this type, as you can imagine, is very well organized. They're natural leaders and they're very verbal. So if you look into this type, one thing that comes up across different websites and while you're doing research, if you decide to do that, as I was doing research, this type is really, really good at communicating and really, really good at problem solving and taking the lead. So the difference here is the action, right? Some people are really, really good at problem solving, but taking the lead is a big reach, right? That takes a lot. For this ENTJ type, it's very natural for them to do that. So that doesn't mean that they are all going to be Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates types of people, creating new tech platforms, which is awesome. If you do that, go you. You can also be an ENTJ in normal life and look at professions like human resource manager or a company CEO or higher up manager, right? An SVP of something, lawyers, scientists, software developers, business analysts, entrepreneurs. These make great entrepreneurs because you are, once again, really good at problem spotting and taking the lead and assertive, right? So in order to really excel in entrepreneurship, you got to be assertive. So great, great, great profession for you if you are an ENTJ. Lowest earner is the INFP. Okay, so INFPs, don't get upset because you are the healers. You are compassionate and caring. And the only reason that they tend to be the lowest earner is because they tend to focus more on work that aligns with their personal values and allows them to help others instead of like money or status. And if they were to go after money or status, they would really feel unfulfilled. Like that would not fill them up. A lot of INFPs tend to be artists, counselors, graphic designers, librarians, psychologists, physical therapists, social workers, or writers. As we're talking about money as it relates to our personality type, I did a little bit of research and I thought it was really interesting. So almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 10 of the types tend to make the most money in their 50s. And only 6 of the types really peak in their 40s in terms of their income. So the 6 types that peak in their 40s in terms of making the most income that they will in their professional lives are as follows: ENTP, ENTJ, ESFJ, ESTJ, INFP, so the one that we were just talking about, and ISTJ. All of those really peak in their 40s in terms of the money that they make, which I thought was really interesting and a lot more ease there. All right, so there it is. That is a little glimpse into the world of MBTI. If you want to know your type, look in the show notes for a link. And really, this is such a great tool for you to help zero in on who you are naturally drawn towards and what you are naturally skilled at. And in our next solo episode, we will dive into another juicy and useful personality test that can help you excel in your career. Thank you so much and see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I'm so grateful for your precious time and energy. And if anything resonated with you, please feel free to share with a friend and subscribe. If you are interested in career coaching, I would love to hear from you. Email me at courtney@resume-careers.com and follow me on Instagram at CourtneyAustinPage. Thank you so much and see you next week.